The country railway station. A peaceful, tranquil scene in complete harmony with its rural surroundings. This is a scene that's remained the same for generations of travellers. Today, in the 1980s, only the motive power has changed. But whether steam or diesel traction, the trains still pass through, shattering the calm, as they did 50 years or more ago. But the scene here at Hayden House is deceptive, for this location represents an island in a sea of change that has reduced our rural railway network to a handful of lines. For East Lincolnshire is littered with dozens of closed stations. In the first part of this programme, we'll explore the railways of this area both today and in the 1960s. In 1969, despite a series of closures during the previous 20 years, East Lincolnshire still possessed a good network of rural lines. But in 1970, the network east of Lincoln was to be reduced to one long branch serving the resort at Skegness. We'll now take a journey along the line that existed from Lincoln through Woodhall Junction to Thursby. Our journey will start here at a place called Bardney, just a few miles east of Lincoln. Today, only these magnificent buildings remain of a once busy and large station. This structure was built in 1848 and is now a listed building. Contemporary with the station is this goods shed, again dating from 1848. It's likely that these buildings will soon be removed piecemeal and rebuilt on another site. Just 5 years ago, the station was the end of a freight line from Lincoln to the sugar beet factory just beyond the station. This traffic was withdrawn in 1979. 18 years ago, the station was still open to passenger traffic and was served by trains running from Lincoln to Thursby. We'll now travel east towards Thursby. Although the line passed through flat country with only very slight grades, there were many gentle curves as the railway followed along the course of navigations. Woodhall Junction. This was the junction for the branch north to Horncastle, and in 1969 this was still open to freight traffic, although passenger traffic ceased way back in 1954. Today the station survives. The buildings have been converted to a private dwelling. Just east of Woodhall, the original route curved away to the right towards Boston. This, however, was closed to passenger traffic in 1963. The section of line we're now travelling on was opened in August 1913 and was built to offer the Great Northern a more direct route to Skegness. The line was built to a light railway order, but in reality it was nothing of the sort, being clearly intended to take substantial holiday trains bound for Skegness. The light railway was thought by many to be a way of obtaining land at cheap rates. Station design has changed dramatically on this section. These are functional and austere compared with those at Bardney and Woodhall. Paradoxically, it is the station buildings which have survived while the track bed has disappeared, having been ploughed under and returned to agricultural use. There were two more stations on the line. Neither served a place of any size, and it's hardly surprising the line saw only sparse traffic. Bellwater marks the junction with the main line from Boston to Skegness. We've travelled 22 miles along this double-tracked cross-country branch. Now we'll head due north along those lines which existed in 1969 from Fursby to Mablethorpe and from Fursby to Grimsby. Today, the Skegness line curves to the right. The track bed, which once ran due north, has been ploughed under. But in 1969, this was the centre of a series of junctions handling many trains each hour. Fursby was a delightful junction station, complete with overall roof. It was in the middle of nowhere, and its sole purpose was to act as an interchange point for the network of lines in this area. On a summer Saturday, the station saw a series of holiday trains. This Class 31 has worked from Mablethorpe and is bound for London. Another holiday train from Skegness to London takes the avoiding line through the South Junction. The line through here once had main line status, carrying both freight and passenger traffic from Grimsby to London. However, in the early 1960s, this traffic was diverted via Lincoln, leaving only these local trains. Thursby possessed at this time the last overall roof of Great Northern origin. Those at Louth and Alford had already been demolished. The line north to Grimsby ran level and straight through numerous wayside halts and level crossings. Willoughby, another junction station, this time serving the line to Mablethorpe, which diverged to the right of this view. Alford's overall roof was removed in the years leading up to the Second World War. During the war, a simple canopy was constructed using supports made of old bullhead rail sections. There were a total of 3 halts just north of Alford. All had long since closed to passenger traffic. Louth. This station served a town of some size. It was the first place in East Lincolnshire to be connected by rail, having been reached by a line from Grimsby in 1848. Today, the signal box survives, having been kept in good condition by the East Lincolnshire Preservation Society. But the station, despite a Grade 2 listing, may soon succumb to the demolition contractors. Elsewhere, station buildings have survived in a remarkable state of preservation. This example is at Alford. Now we return to the junction station of Willoughby, this time to travel along the branch line to the seaside town of Mablethorpe. In true branch line style, the Mablethorpe trains started from a bay platform alongside the main line. The station was rebuilt in the 1890s and is identical in design and construction to those being erected at this time along the suburban railways serving King's Cross. In 1970, it represented a classic example of late Great Northern architecture sitting in the wilds of Lincolnshire. The railways in this area possessed a curious mixture of standard and somersault signals. The somersaults were introduced by the Great Northern at the turn of the century in response to the accident at Abbots Ripton. Mablethorpe was, at the time these scenes were taken, severely run down. Closure was just a few months away. The station was once on a through line running north and then east to rejoin the main line at Louth. This line was closed in 1951. The railway system of East Lincolnshire represented one of the last rural networks to succumb to closure. The problems it suffered were common to country railways everywhere. Much of the traffic to the coast was seasonal. There were few towns of any size, and with little or no industry, freight was of little significance. Today, in 1987, Hayden House Station is a solitary reminder of this once extensive network. It's the exception, though, rather than the rule. In the early 1960s, virtually every corner of the country was served by rail. Wales was no exception. Anglesey and Snowdonia once possessed an extensive network of standard gauge and narrow gauge railways. Today, only a few standard gauge lines survive. We'll now go back to 1964, and using a collection of archive film, we'll travel along the branches that once existed from Avonwen to Bangor, and from Bangor to Amlwch. Pwllheli, September 1964. Many of the trains to Barmouth were still in the hands of steam. However, many of the branches were now using these Derby lightweight units. They were introduced on this line, in particular, due to the need to reverse at the junction at Avonwen. The first part of the journey takes us 5 miles along the coast through Penny Chain and the Butlins holiday camp. We're now approaching Avonwen. This was primarily an interchange station for the Bangor line and did not serve a place of any size. The station here was splendidly situated alongside the sea. This station was originally in Western Region territory. However, the line was, in 1956, transferred from the Western to the Midland region, hence the maroon signboards on the station. Now we're on the branch to Bangor. This line was built by the Carnarvonshire Railway and opened in 1867. Later the line was taken over by the London and North Western Railway. It was once an important branch connecting the standard gauge systems of Mid and North Wales. It also served as a connecting route for a narrow gauge line joining at Dinas Junction, and standard gauge branches joining at Pennygross and Carnarvon. By the time these scenes were taken, the branch was very run down and just a few months away from closure. On this day, despite a frantic search by all the members of the train crew, there wasn't a passenger to be found. The line possessed little in the way of steep grades. It wound a course between Snowdonia to the east and the hills of the Llyn Peninsula to the west. Just south of Carnarvon, the line joined the branch from Llanberis. This closed to passenger traffic way back in 1932, although it was still open to freight traffic in 1964. Now we are entering Carnarvon. The town possessed a sizable station, and much of the traffic was derived from the section running northeast to Bangor. The line from here to Avonwen closed to passenger traffic on the 7th of December 1964. However, the route north remained open until January 1970. One reason for this was the investiture of the Prince of Wales in 1969, and such an event generated considerable traffic. Menai Bridge, and the junction with the main line to Holyhead. Strangely, this station was to be closed in February 1966, well before the closure of the Carnarvon line. Bangor, and we travel from Cardigan Bay to the North Wales coast. From here, we'll join the branch to Amlwch on the island of Anglesey. The Menai Bridge, in its original condition before the fire and subsequent rebuilding in the 1970s. Llanfair Pwllgwyn, Gylch Goch, Gerich Horn, Drobolch, Llandesilio, Go Go Goch, or Llanfair PG as it's more commonly known. A station with the distinction of having the longest station name in Britain. This did not, however, save it from closure in February 1966. It also has the distinction of being the only passenger station to reopen and close twice in the space of 18 years. Gairwen was a small junction from where the Amruch line diverged. It was also, at one time, the junction for the rather obscure branch to Red Wharf Bay. This particular line closed in 1930. The Amruch line was one of the first to be dieselized in the mid-1950s. It was felt that such isolated branches would benefit from the new Derby lightweight units. These units, with their large observation windows at each end, were certainly popular, although they could not save the line from closure in 1964. The line was single track, with passing loops at many of the stations. It wound a course north, connecting a series of villages. Being primarily an agricultural area, traffic was light. Amlwch was a delightful terminus. It had all the features associated with a country railway. A run-round loop, goods yard and signal box, complete with single platform and well-built station buildings. But the era of the Welsh Country Railway was drawing to a close. On the 7th of December 1964, both the Amlwch and the Afan Wen lines closed to passenger traffic. Although the branch through Anglesey was to remain open for freight traffic, the line was never quite the same. It seems as though island railways command a different set of rules to those of railways operating on the mainland. Hayling Island, tucked away off the coast of southeast Hampshire, was no exception. It once possessed a fascinating branch running the 4 miles from the junction with the rest of the network at Havant. Although the island's railway was physically connected to the network, it was this very connection across to the mainland which gave the branch its distinctive character. 24 years after closure, the foundations and some of the metalwork of the bridge across to the mainland survives. The structure was built in 1863 and ran across the mouth of the harbour. To allow ships to pass through, it had a swivelling bridge at its centre. Although the piers for this central section were built of cast iron, the sections either side were built of timber. The foundations for the main supports are still clearly visible. And over this bridge for nearly 70 years ran the famous Stroudley Terriers. We'll now go back in time to 1963, and using a collection of archive film, we'll explore this branch as it existed in the days of steam. The bridge had a weight restriction, and consequently these diminutive 060 tanks were the only locomotives able to operate the branch. A distinction they were to hold for an incredible 70 years. The junction with the mainland network was here at Havant, where the branch terminated in a bay platform alongside the main line. There were 2 intermediate stations on the branch. The first was here at Langston and was located near to the bridge which crossed to the island. The second was at North Hayling and consisted of a short wooden platform and shelter. Freight traffic was often operated in the form of a mixed train, a common mode of operation in other countries, but rare here in Britain. This sequence shows an early morning mixed train departing North Hayling in March 1963. From North Hayling to the terminus, the branch ran alongside the sea for much of its length. Most of the traffic on the branch was of a seasonal nature. In midsummer, trains would be packed and would run to 4 coaches, but in the winter, traffic was light. The line's survival was helped by the fact that the road bridge to the mainland was extremely congested during summer weekends. The Terrier 060's longevity was assured by the weight restriction in force over the bridge to the mainland. They were introduced way back in October 1872 for use on the East London Railway, which had steep gradients and light rails. In 1963, 10 of the original build of 50 survived, and 5 of these were retained to work on this branch. At the time, they were the oldest locomotives in operational service. With the beaching cuts of the early 60s in full swing, it was inevitable that the branch would succumb to closure. And on Saturday, the 2nd of November, the last scheduled train ran the 4 miles to Hayling Island. The following day, Sunday the 3rd, the line would be allowed one final fling. A special operated by the Locomotive Club of Great Britain would make the very last journey. The branch train was known affectionately as the Hailing Billy by both locals and enthusiasts alike, and on this day they came out in their thousands to pay their last respects. As the very last train left the terminus, an era had ended for this delightful country branch. The end of an era, not just for the Hailing Island branch, but for country railways throughout the country. The Afan Wen and Amlwch branches closed to passenger traffic on the 7th of December 1964. The network in East Lincolnshire closed to all traffic on the 5th of October 1970. The days of the country branch line were most surely drawing to a close.